Hare Krishna, thank you for joining this morning. Srimad Bhagavatam class and attentive japa. Nice to have your association. So we'll make a start. Quick prayer first of all. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Jai. Hare Krishna. So today we're talking about Jada Bharat. I think we're all familiar with Jada Bharat and maybe not so much familiar with his conversation with Maharaj Rahugana. So we'll talk about that. And as you know, this Jada Bharat was Bharat Maharaj in his previous life, and then he became a deer in his next life, and then became Jada Bharat. And having given up the body of a deer, so he took birth in the womb of the wife of a Brahman. So Jada Bharat was a Brahman. So in this life, he could also remember the activities of his past life. And in order to avoid the influence of society, he remained like a deaf and dumb person. So he was very smart, obviously, but he behaved like, he wasn't normal. He was very careful not to fall down again this time. He didn't mix with anyone who wasn't a devotee. And one day, what happened, King Rahugana is the ruler of the states known as Sindhu and Sovira, needed a carrier of palanquin. So his men were going around trying to just pick people they thought could do the job. So his chief carriers found Jada Bharat as the most likely person to do the work, because he was looked quite strong. So he was therefore forced to carry the palanquin, and Jada Bharat, however, didn't protest this proud order, but humbly accepted the job and carried the palanquin. But while carrying it, however, he was very careful to see that he didn't step on an ant. And whenever he saw one, he would stop until the ant had passed. And because of this, he couldn't keep pace with the other carriers. The king within the palanquin became very disturbed by this and chastised Jada Bharat with filthy language. But Jada Bharat, being completely freed from the bodily conception, did not protest. He proceeded carrying the palanquin. When he continued as before, the king threatened him with punishment. The king got really fed up with him, stopping and starting the palanquin. So he threatened him that he's going to punish him now if he doesn't behave. And being threatened by the king, Jada Bharat began to talk. He protested against the filthy language used by the king when the king chastised him and then threatened him to punishment. So this is what the Jada Bharat said. He said, "My dear king, although you are not all experienced, you are trying to speak like a very experienced man. Consequently, you cannot be considered an experienced man. An experienced person does not speak the way you are speaking about the relationship between a master and a servant, or about material pains and pleasures. These are simply external activities. Any advanced, experienced man, considering the absolute truth, doesn't talk in this way." So Sripad explains that at the present moment, like the entire world is full of foolish people. Bhagavad-Gita describes these people as mudas. They try to rule human society, but because they are devoid of the spiritual knowledge, the entire world is in a chaotic condition. And to be released from these miserable conditions, one has to become Krishna conscious and take lessons from an exalted personality like Jada Bharat, Lord Krishna, or Kapila Dev. So that's the only way to solve the problems of material life. Then Jada Bharat continues. He says, "My dear king, talks of the relation between the master and the servant, the king and the subject, are so forth, are simply talks about material activities. People interested in material activities which are expounded in the Vedas are intent on performing material sacrifices and placing faith in their material activities. For such people, spiritual advancement is definitely not manifest." So he says that if you are in a material conception, then you can't advance in spirituality. So, like a dream becomes automatically known to a person as false and immaterial, and similarly, one eventually realizes that material happiness in this life or the next life, on this planet or a higher planet, is insignificant. When one realizes this, the Vedas, although an excellent source, are insufficient to bring about direct knowledge of the truth, because these lives, wherever it is, this planet, and they're temporary, very, very temporary, very flash in time. So one may dream that he has become a king with God, with good family, wife, and children, but immediately at the end of that dream, he comes to the conclusion that it is false. Similarly, all kinds of material happiness are undesirable for a person who wants spiritual salvation. If a person doesn't come to the conclusion that he's nothing to do with any kind of material happiness, he cannot come to the platform of understanding the absolute truth. And then Jada Bharat explains to Rahugana about the bewilderment of the mind. Excuse me. So Jada Bharat goes on to explain, because the mind is absorbed in desires for pious and impious activities, it is naturally subjected to the transformation of lust and anger. In this way, it becomes attracted to material sense enjoyment. In other words, the mind is conducted by the mode of goodness, passion, and ignorance. So we don't have any control. The three modes are controlling us. There are 11 senses and 5 material elements, and out of these 16 items, the mind is the chief. Therefore, the mind brings about birth in different types of bodies, among demigods, human beings, animals, and birds. So when the mind is situated in a higher or lower position, it accepts a higher or lower material body. So, it's really telling about the mind now. It says, when the living entity's mind becomes absorbed in sense gratification of the material world, it brings about his conditioned life and suffering within the material situation. However, when the mind becomes unattached to material enjoyment, it becomes the cause of liberation. So the mind is your enemy and mind is also your friend. So when the flame in a lamp burns the wick improperly, the lamp is blackened. But when that same lamp is filled with the ghee and is burning properly, there is bright illumination. Similarly, when the mind is absorbed in material sense gratification, it causes suffering. And when detached from material sense gratification, it brings about the original brightness of Krishna consciousness. So the mind is compared to the wick of a lamp. So there are 5 working senses and 5 knowledge acquiring senses. There is also the false ego, and this way there are 11 items for the mind's functions. O hero, the objects of the senses such as sound and touch, the organic activities such as evacuation, and the different types of bodies, society, friendship, and personality are considered by learned scholars the fields of activity for the functions of the mind. So the mind works through these things. My dear King Rahugana, as long as the conditioned soul accepts the material body and is not freed from the contamination of material enjoyment, and as long as he does not conquer his 6 enemies and come to the platform of self-realization by awakening his spiritual knowledge, he has to wander among different places and different species of life in this world. So as well as the knowledge gathering senses and working senses, we also have to deal with the 6 enemies of the mind. And when the mind is not in our control, then it gets illusioned by these enemies. These enemies take over, and it causes our fall down. We don't control our mind, then the enemies will come and attack us. So who are these enemies? Kam, Krodh, Madh, Moha, Bhay, Matsarya. And these attacks of which are actually lust, greed, anger, madness, illusion, and envy. These are the 6 enemies which reappear again and again and attack the mind. At a time like that, it is more difficult to experience everything as inspiring and ever fresh. So when one is under attack, then one experiences a little difficulty. Spiritual life at that time becomes a struggle. And when one's mind is absorbed in the material conception, he thinks that he belongs to a particular nation, family, country, or creed. These are called upadhis, designations, and one has to become freed from them. Sarvapadi vinur muktam. As long as one is not freed, he has to continue to condition life in material existence. The human form of life is meant for cleansing away these misconceptions. If this is not done, one has to repeat the cycle of birth and death and thus suffer all material conditions. So the mind has to be controlled. If it's not controlled, then it gets mixed up with all these enemies, and they bring the mind down, and they bring the living entity, the soul, down as well with them. So the soul's designation, the mind, is the cause of all tribulations in the material world. So as long as this fact is unknown to the conditioned living entity, he has to accept the miserable conditions of material body and wander within this universe in different positions. Because the mind is affected by disease, lamentation, illusion, attachment, greed, enmity. It creates bondage and a false sense of intimacy within this material world. The mind is a cause of both material bondage and liberation. The impure mind thinks, I am this body. The pure mind knows that he is not the material body. Therefore, the mind is considered to be the root of all material designations. And the mind is illusioned, isn't it, by the false ego, by the three modes of nature. The mind is put into illusion. Until the living entity is aloof from the association and contamination of this material world, the mind will be absorbed in such material things as birth, death, disease, illusion, attachment, greed, and enmity. In this way, the living entity is conditioned and it suffers material miseries. So, we say that we can't control the mind. Mind gives us a lot of trouble. Well, because the mind is not in our control. This is the problem. We don't have any control over it. The mind is controlling us. So what to do? So what do you do when the mind is controlling us and we have no control over it? Well, this uncontrolled mind is the greatest enemy of the living entity, as we all have experienced and we know. And if one gives it a chance, it will grow more and more powerful and become victorious, which it does. Although it is not factual, it is very strong. Because Krishna is he's like, mind is like God. We can't, very difficult to control. It covers the constitutional position of the soul. So it takes over the soul. Okay? So what the soul does, supposed to do, the mind starts doing. It takes over, dominates the soul. O King, please try to conquer this mind by the weapon of service to the lotus feet of the spiritual master and the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Do this with great care. So Jada Bharat is saying that if you want to control the mind, then you do devotional service. Serve and serve Krishna, and that, when done properly, is supposed to control the mind. Ultimately, mind comes under control. If you want to control the senses, then you do services as well. And actually, the mind is really controlled by doing devotional service and following the rules and regulations. That's the key. The rules and regulations are the key. That when you follow rules and regulations, the mind rebels, isn't it? He doesn't want to follow the rules and regulations. He wants to eat. He wants to drink. He wants to eat meat, Kentucky, whatever people like, fish, wants to eat. But you're saying to it, no, I'll tell you what you can do and what you can't do. Don't let the mind run wildly, at its own whims. This is why the rules and regulations are there. The rules and regulations are there to punish us. They are also there to help us to tolerate, to control ourselves. The service is there to control our senses, because our senses want to do other things. But we are doing service, although we're trying to please Krishna, but for our material benefit, we're trying to show the senses. Now you get your pleasure out of doing these services, not pleasure out of watching films or sports or whatever one enjoys doing. You get your pleasure out of this. So we are in control. So There is one easy weapon with which the mind can be conquered: neglect. The mind is always telling us to do this or that. Therefore, we should be very expert in disobeying the mind's orders. Gradually, the mind should be trained to obey the orders of the soul, of the living entity, which is us. It is not that one should obey the orders of the mind. Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Thakur used to say that to control the mind, one should beat it with shoes many times just after awakening and again before going to sleep. In this way, one can control the mind. So that's just, just to say that keep it tight. This is the instructions of all the Shastras. If one does not do so, one is doomed to follow the dictations of the mind. Another bona fide process is to abide strictly to the orders of the spiritual master and engage in the Lord's service. And the spiritual master tells us to do the 4 regulations. And when one receives the seed of devotional service by the mercy of the Guru and Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, one's real life begins. If one abides by the orders of the spiritual master, by the grace of Krishna, he is freed from service to the mind. So after hearing this, King Rahugana, the king hearing the instructions of Jada Bharat, was awakened to his real knowledge. His eyes opened. Oh my God, yes, you're so right. And when he came to his consciousness, he understood that he had offended a great, learned and saintly person. At that time, he very humbly and respectfully prayed to Jada Bharat. He now wanted to understand the deep meaning of the philosophical words used by Jada Bharat, and with great sincerity, he begged his pardon and he admitted that if one offends the lotus feet of a pure devotee, he is certainly punished by the trident of Lord Shiva. So he became conscious of that. And Jada Bharat was very brave to confront the king like that. He was obviously very confident that he convinced the king, because normally when you talk like that to a king, he'll have your head chopped off. Normally, they don't listen to anybody. They make the rules, the law. They are the law. So King Rahugana said, "O most exalted personality, you are not different from the Supreme Personality of Godhead. By the influence of your true self, all kinds of contradictions in the Shastras have been removed. In the dress of a friend of a Brahman, you are hiding your transcendental position. I offer my respectful obeisance unto you. O best of the Brahmans, my body is filled with dirty things, and my vision has been bitten by the serpent of the pride. Due to my material conceptions, I am diseased. Your nectarian instructions are the proper medicine for one suffering from such a fever, and they are cooling waters for one scorched by the heat." And I guess the heat is probably the forest fire that we talk about. So whatever doubts I have about a particular subject matter, I shall ask you about later. For the time being, these mysterious yoga instructions you have given me for self-realization appear very difficult to understand. Please repeat them in a simple way so that I can understand them and obviously implement them. My mind is very inquisitive and I want to understand this clearly. So the self-realized Brahman, Jada Bharat, said, "Among the various material combinations and permutations, there are various forms and earthly transformations. For some reason, these move on the surface of the earth and are called palanquin carriers." So now is bringing him to the reality of what just happened. Those material transformations which don't move are gross material objects like stones. In any case, the material body is made of earth and stone in the form of feet, ankles, calves, knees, thighs, torso, throat and head. And upon the shoulders is the wooden palanquin, and within the palanquin is the so-called king of Savira. The body of the king is simply another transformation of earth, but within that body your lordship is situated, and falsely thinking that you are the king of the state of Savira. It is a fact, however, that these innocent people carrying your palanquin without payment are certainly suffering due to this injustice. Their condition is very lamentable because you have forcibly engaged them in carrying your palanquin. This proves that you are cruel and unkind, yet due to false prestige, you were thinking that you were protecting the citizens. This is ludicrous. You are such a fool that you could not have been adored as a great man in an assembly of persons advanced in knowledge. So after receiving lessons from the great devotee Jada Bharat, King Rahugana of the state of Savira became completely aware of the constitutional position of the soul. He thus gave up the bodily conception completely. My dear king, whoever takes shelter of the servant of the Lord is certainly glorified, because he can without difficulty give up the bodily conception. And this is what we are advised to do, to give up our bodily conception. And Maharaj Rahugana, he was very fortunate to get the association of Jada Bharat, who was actually, starts with Rishi Badev. His son was Maharaj Bharat, and Maharaj Bharat took the birth of into body of a deer, and then came as Jada Bharat. So it's the same living entity that came from Rishi Badev, who was God himself. So yeah, I could say that Jada Bharat was a reincarnation of God, and so Maharaj Rahugana was very fortunate to get instructions from him, and it completely changed his life. So thank you so much. Thank you all for joining. Ami Mataji, Rukmini Mataji, iPhone Prabhu, I think Natarajan Prabhu, Jai Prabhu, Jai Mataji, Partha Prabhu, Parveen Mataji, Sandhya Mataji, Sarveshriya Mataji, and Venkat Prabhu. Jai. Thank you all for joining. And so let's have a little discussion on this. What do we learn? What do we understand from these instructions? And who would like to start? Maybe Jai Prabhu, would you like to say something?
Hare Krishna.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the main message here is about the uncontrolled mind. So now, as long as one identifies with the body and is engaged in material activities and material enjoyment, one has to go through pain and suffering and repeated birth and death. The way to control the mind is engaging in fixing it on Krishna and through devotional service to him. And I mean, yeah. So you mentioned like it's like this material world is like a dream, really. So when you wake up from a dream, you realize it was fake and insignificant. So similarly, material happiness is just like that. Also, you mentioned about if Jada Bharat was careful not to kill the ants. I think if somebody leaves their body prematurely, for accidental death, I think they have to come back to that body. So yeah. What else? I'll leave it at that. So yeah.
Thank you so much for your input. Who else we have? Venkat Prabhu, would you like to say something?
Sorry, Prabhu. I was just taking time to unmute myself. I don't have anything else to add, Prabhu, but thanks for your wonderful class and yeah.
Thank you, Prabhu.
Thank you.
Ami Mataji, I think you might be driving. Sorry. Okay. Who else we have? Would like to speak? Sarveshi Mataji.
Hare Krishna.
Jai Mataji.
Maharaj Bharat, what I think Maharaj Bharat was a liberated and Krishna conscious person, but Rahugana was conditioned under the material nature.
Sure.
Maharaj Bharat saw everybody equally. Just like Krishna says in Bhagavad-Gita, Vidya Binay Sampane Bhavane Gavi Hasani Shuni Cho Shopake Cha Pandita Samdarshina. The humble sages, by virtue of true knowledge, see with equal vision a learned and gentle Brahmana, a cow, an elephant, dog eater, an outcast, all same. But Rahugana He saw everybody differently. He thought people are, some are higher, some are lower. So he was king, and the people who were carrying the palanquin were lower than him.
Very good.
So mind, mind plays very important part in, because the mind is cause of bondage and mind is cause of liberation. So the mind is a leader of the senses.
Yes.
Although the intelligence is higher than the mind, but sometimes the mind overtakes intelligence, and then it creates pious and impious activities, and thus one becomes conditioned and suffers. One should not listen to the mind all times. You have to use their intelligence. That's why mind is like five senses are like five horses. Mind is like a rain. Intelligence is like driver. And then living entity is like a passenger. Whatever the driver does, he suffers or he enjoys.
Sure.
And so we have to, the intelligence should control the mind. The cause of conditioned life is attachment to the house, to the family, to the country. We're thinking about it, and sometimes when we are on our deathbed, we think of all these things, and then that cause of our conditioned life, and then we are born again in that condition. And then it's very important to have a spiritual master who can guide us. And give us Krishna conscious, just like Raja Bharat, he done it to Rahugana, so we can have the knowledge. And then how to control, he gave the different ways how to control your mind. And to control the mind, you have to learn, and where you can learn all this, you have to read the Bhagavad-Gita. Krishna says how to control your mind. And there's a lot of brahmanas and devotees, they control the mind, they done austerities. So by that we can learn how to control our mind. And that's a very good lesson, because mind is the leader, and because of the mind we take our next birth and we go on down, 8,400,000 species. So that's a very good lesson is telling about King Bharat telling Rahugana, so we can learn all the lesson from. That's why the main thing is why Bhagavatam written, so that we can learn from it and we can follow it.
Sure.
Hare Krishna.
Jai, thank you so much, Mataji. That was wonderful. Yeah, you're quite right. We have like, now there's once upon a time I could never imagine fasting even half day, because the mind wouldn't accept it. But because we have this spiritual master and Lord Krishna, once you join the Krishna consciousness, you get that strength. Even now sometimes I think, oh my God, I've got to do like Nirjala Kadashi, or it's Janmashtami, you have to fast till like 1 o'clock in the night. But somehow the energy comes to you, the energy, Krishna gives you the energy, the strength, and then you're able to control the mind, and the mind doesn't disturb you, especially if you come to the temple and join the devotees, and you see them and you're doing the same thing, and you somehow get energy, your strength from each other. So it's very important to get the knowledge and get the association. And like you said, that the mind is the neighbor, actually is the neighbor of the intelligence, and these two neighbors are always in conversation. And sometimes the neighbor called intelligence gets influenced by the neighbor called the mind. So the neighbor intelligence has to be careful that when it takes association of the mind, that it doesn't literally take association, it gives association. So the intelligence should be telling the mind, teaching the mind rather than learning from the mind. It should be teaching the mind things. And where does the intelligence get its, so what is the source of its intelligence? How does it get strong? By having classes like this, by reading the Shastras, listening to other classes. So the mind, so the intelligence becomes powerful. It's got a lot of ammunition, and it can bring the mind to control by explaining, look, it's not like this, it's like this. This is the right way because of this reason, reasoning, logical reasons. So this is why important that we do reading as well, and we talk to our mind. We bring it under restraint. But we know what we're talking about, then we can understand it. We don't know what we're talking about, then the mind can fool us very easily. Mind is very clever. It can very easily fool us. It will find ways. The mind knows our weaknesses and it'll find ways to fool us and will fall into the trap. Okay, Partha Prabhu. Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. Nothing to add. It's a nice class. One thing I was when I was reading this, I came to know that like Bharat Maharaj is the son of Rantidev, and Rantidev is literally an expansion. I mean, the expansion of the Lord. And Rantidev is a person who did the big penance, I think, and he was doing fasting. And when he was doing fasting at the end, when he was about to take the offering, the food, honor the food, I mean, three people came, and somebody asked him to give some food, and then he gave them food, first Brahmin and then Sudra. I mean, I think you only mentioned this in one of the class, Prabhu, like first Brahmana come, then Sudra come, then a person with dogs come. So he just sacrificed everything because he just want other people to live happily, and he's not bothered about himself. So, and Bharat Maharaj is the son of Rantidev. So obviously that's nice life.
So who was the son of Rantidev, Prabhu?
Bharat Maharaj?
No, it's Rishibadev.
Rishabhadev. Oh, Rishabhadev. Yeah, correct. Sorry. Rishabhadev.
Okay, it's a good example. Thank you, Prabhu. Thank you so much. Okay. Parveen Mataji.
Hare Krishna Prabhu. Yeah, very nice class. All the points been discussed. Yes, very nice. So main thing is the mind. So in Bhagavad-Gita, Lord says as well, controlled mind is your friend and uncontrolled mind is your enemy. And the other thing, like you mentioned, was Sarvopadi. So the shloka from Bhakti Rasamrit Sindhu came to my head. Yeah, Sarvopadi Vinirmuktam. Tatparatvena Nirmalam Rishikena Rishikesha Sevana Bhakti Uchyate. So it's only when we engage all our senses in the service of Lord, the pure devotional service happens. So we need to control all our senses, which is done by activities in Krishna consciousness. So again, we are very, very lucky to have Srila Prabhupada to, give us Krishna consciousness and association of all, like Prabhupada say, lotus flower-like devotees. So I'm very fortunate to have everybody's association. So yeah, so we just need to engage, and it's a very good start. So always look forward to Friday class. Thank you, Prabhuji. Yeah, so it is good to control the mind.
That's right. The mind always needs to be engaged. Always needs engagement. And because it's like a child, it has its own tastes and needs. So we have to, the intelligence has to engage the mind in something appropriate, something with substance, which is Krishna consciousness. If we just allow the mind to do whatever, and then it
Yeah.
the wrong way and bring us.
And we also understand how addiction works now, because I can see how I am addicted, because I'm constantly, yes, I want to learn this, I want to read this now. So it's a really nice addiction to have in life. So to read Bhagavatam and so many books, Srila Prabhupada books. So I just can't wait. My worry is I'm so old and there is so much to read, and I don't know how it will happen, but Krishna's mercy, it's happening.
Well, absolutely. I mean, I think we're discussing in Parshuram Prabhu's, was it Parshuram Prabhu's class? Oh, I think it was last week, last Sunday, that Dayananda Swami Maharaj. I mean, he was saying that Krishna knows. See, with Krishna, it's all about what you're holding back, or not about what you're giving. Krishna is just whether it's money, or time, or effort. Okay, It's all about what are you holding back, you know. If like always, you know, money comes, example comes easy to me. So if somebody's giving £1 million but he's a billionaire, and another person giving £10, well, Krishna wants to say, what did you hold back? He doesn't care whether you gave him £1 million or you gave him £10. He wants to know, well, how much could you have given? So it's same with our time. So Krishna knows how much time we can give, you know, realistically, and how much of the time are we giving realistically, you know. So if we have only certain amount of time or certain amount of age, well, as long as, you know, we are doing our best, and that's all we can do. We can do our best, and Krishna understands that this is what we can do. He doesn't have you know, Krishna doesn't make demands that are not realistic. He would only, you know, expect what, you know, what he knows that we are capable of. And I heard the example that with Sri Prabhupada, that this Mataji said that she had distributed a book, and she was not very good at distributing books, and, you know, she really struggled, and she distributed a book, and Sri Prabhupada was very, very happy, you know, wow, and he really praised her. And then another devotee, he says, I've done like so many hundreds of books, and Prabhupada says, you must improve. So they couldn't understand, you know, what's going on, that he was expecting to be praised, but Prabhupada praised the lady because he knew that she was struggling, whereas the Prabhu, who done hundreds of books distribution, he was an expert at it. So Prabhupada expected him to do better. So it wasn't the case of whether you distributed one book or you distributed hundreds of books. It's what you can do, you know, what your limitations are, whether it's age or money or health, whatever it is. So Krishna looks at, you know, all these factors, that what you could have done and what you did do. You know, if you did your best, then that's good enough for Lord Krishna. Does that make sense, Mataji?
She's gone.
Okay, right. Okay, so I think we can chant now a couple of rounds. I don't know who's first today. Sureshi Mataji there, isn't it? Yeah, Sureshi Mataji, are you there? Could you unmute yourself, Mataji?
Can you unmute?
Hare Krishna, Mataji.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
नमः ओम विष्णुपदाय कृष्णवत्साय भूतले श्रीमती भक्ति वेदांत स्वामिनी नामने नमस्ते सरस्वती देवे गौरवाण विचारिणे निर्विशेष शून्यवादी पश्चातारिणे जय श्री कृष्ण चैतन्य प्रभु नित्यानंद श्री द्वैत गदाधर श्रीवासी गौर भक्त बिंद हरे कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम राम हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे 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 राम 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 हरे 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 कृष्णा 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 हरे